There's more new gameplay for God of War Ragnarok, showing some traversal and puzzle footage of Svartalfheim. And while it definitely looks good, some fans are now worried that Ragnarok won't improve enough on the original, so I wanted to shed some light on that as well. So if you're excited for the next God of War, then totally leave a like on the video, subscribe so you won't miss any news on the game, and let's go! So like with the previous Game Informer gameplay that was all about the combat, the new gameplay only amounts to some pretty short clips. But there are definitely some interesting details here to go over. We can see the livelier environments I talked about in an earlier video on full display here, with the dwarves on the shores just going about their daily business. In the subtitles during the boat ride we also see Atreus mentioning something about earthquakes, so I think we might see the results of those when we travel further into the realm. But what's way more exciting are the two small puzzles they showed in Svartalfheim. One has Kratos freeze a geyser with the Leviathan axe, which I think even creates a platform you might be able to step on. There's also this Steam device that shows a button prompt specifically for the Blades of Chaos, which Kratos then pulls open to turn a wheel into motion. Now we already used the Blades of Chaos and the Leviathan axe to solve puzzles in God of War 2018, but the ingredients of those puzzles were often the same. Cogs and breakable chain links for the axe, and then Hell Bramble and the Winds of Hell for the blades. However, judging by this Svartalfheim footage and some quotes from the Game Informer article, in Ragnarok it's much more about how Kratos can use the tools he has at his disposal in order to manipulate his surroundings. So to give you an example, we might not see these geysers return in other realms, but there should be other ways we can interact with the environment to solve puzzles. So this gives each realm even more of its own personality and style, which I think is really cool. But now that we've seen the game in action for a bit, a lot of people seem to think that there's not enough improvements in the sequel, with Gapi saying the new game looks like God of War 1.5 and others like Mohammed calling Ragnarok a DLC. And while I can certainly understand where that comes from, there's a couple of things we need to keep in mind before jumping to a conclusion. For one, we've pretty much only seen the beginning of the game. The first trailer showed clips of Midgard, which is I assume where we start, and then we move on to Svartalfheim, where all the Game Informer footage comes from. We see Kratos with low level gear fighting against level 1 enemies, and we're already able to spot new or changed moves and new mechanics, and it seems like we unlock the new shields early on too, which will already change up combat nicely. The only footage that's a bit further in the game is the few shots we have from Alfheim, which I'm not sure how much later into the game that is. We also know there's going to be a lot more environmental variety in Ragnarok. So far we've only seen small bits from 3 of the 9 realms, and one of them being new for the sequel. In case you don't remember, in God of War 2018 realm travel to Svartalfheim, Vanaheim and Asgard was blocked, but in Ragnarok we will be visiting all the realms at least once. We've already had a sneak peek at the new realms thanks to the map that comes with the Jotnar edition of the game, and I'm especially excited to visit Vanaheim with the lush natural environments and the giant trees. And needless to say, Asgard should be very exciting too, as I expect that is where the game's climax will take place. And even revisiting older realms should be exciting, as all of them are undergoing some sort of change as a result of Ragnarok. Midgard has now completely frozen over to the point where we're forced to use a sled for travel instead of the boat, because even the Lake of Nine is frozen over. And this was something that Game Informer actually confirmed, by the way, that Wolf Sled from the first trailer will actually function in a similar fashion to the boat when in Midgard. But then we have Alfheim here as well, which looks completely different from when we visited in 2018, a lot darker due to the light presumably being gone, plus it's also an active war zone now. So while we might be revisiting some of the same realms and maybe even locations, a lot will have changed since the end of the last game. And maybe some locations will even change while we visit them. The footage we've seen from Svartalfheim so far looks pretty peaceful, but when we look at the cover artwork for the Game Informer issue, we can actually see that the realm is fully under siege. There's dragons, fire raining from the sky, and it looks like the Grim, the Einherjar and the Draugr are all attacking in unison. Even Brok and Sindri are out there fighting for their homeland, which does raise the question if we will have some temporary party members in Ragnarok as well. And the only people who know the answer to that question, and the many other ones I have, are of course the ones working on the game, and from what we know, they sound really excited. Jason Schreier already reported on this a while back, saying that people working on it being God of War Ragnarok, say it's huge and seem to be pretty excited about it. Reminds me of the buzz I was hearing before the 2018 one. So that's already a good sign, but more recently we had Associate Community Manager manager Blue Owlsmatic on Discord saying, "We do have things coming prior to the game release, stuff that will blow your minds," which we know isn't referring to the Game Informer cover story, as that comment is very recent, so it should be something much more exciting than that. And while I don't think it's something they'll reveal in pre-release footage, there's a lot of signs pointing towards us getting a new weapon in Ragnarok, which is most likely going to be Mjolnir. Jordan has been making this point for a while now, but he thinks the fact that Mjolnir is the centerpiece of the collector's edition is a dead giveaway. We also learned about the elemental weapon signature attacks recently, and what hammer just happens to have an element at its disposal that we don't currently have. Plus the design and the runes on it are also very similar to what we already have, although that is likely because Mjolnir, the Leviathan Axe and the Blades of Chaos have all been touched by Brock and Sindri at some point. Still though, it would mean the hammer will fit nicely with what we already have, and I think the Huldra brothers might have some ideas for upgrades as well. And even the Rick and Morty crossover trailer, still can't believe that's an actual sentence, is hinting at us getting some form of a new combat upgrade. As Rick opens the chest to grab the Leviathan Axe, he looks in and says this.
Finally, the Leviathan Axe and other unannounced upgrades.
Now sadly we can't see what's in the chest, but considering its unannounced upgrades, I don't think it's just a pile of shields. And by the way, do you remember how late into the game we actually got the Blades of Chaos? There was nothing about them in pre-release material, yet more than halfway through the game combat was completely switched up by the inclusion of a new weapon. I'm counting on some similar surprises later into the game here, and no way they would show any of those off in pre-launch footage. We should also expect a lot of targets for a new potential weapon, as next to the regular enemies that we'll be facing, there should also be some amazing boss fights in God of War Ragnarok. While 2018 certainly had some amazing fights too, there were a lot of recurring bosses to fill out the roster. But when we look at the potential for Ragnarok, there's some amazing fights there that are just waiting to happen. Thor seems like a very safe bet, as does Freya, and like with Baldur, I reckon that those might be recurring bosses we'll fight more than once. Also, in the final shot of the cinematic trailer, it looks like Kratos and Atreus are gearing up to fight Fenrir, and we also have the dragons on the Game Informer cover hinting at some bigger monster fights as well. And that's just the ones we currently know about, but with how many times Odin has been mentioned and with how Mimir has been setting him up as an antagonist, I can't imagine us not fighting him in the final installment of the Norse mythology saga. There's also still the mysteries of Tyr and Angerboda, especially the latter we know nothing about, so who knows what side she'll end up on. And I think I even found a hint at Hel appearing as an antagonist, as in the lore and legends book for God of War, Atreus makes note of the Hell Walkers being more organized and also them waiting for something. Well, what if they're not waiting for something, but rather someone? Either way, with the amount of potential enemies Santa Monica can pull out of the bag for Ragnarok, I think we'll more than get our fill of amazing boss battles. It's also important to remember that not showing your full hand before release is a strategy that Sony has employed many times before. Horizon Forbidden West only showed some slight improvements to gameplay before launch and only teased its biggest new feature, the inclusion of a flying mount, until right before launch. Ghost of Tsushima, a completely new IP, already revealed a lot of edited footage before the game's release, but our first proper look at gameplay during a dedicated state of play was in May, almost exactly 2 months before the launch of the full game. And while both of those games turned out really well, I definitely get the frustration about the lack of footage. I'm in the same boat here for Ragnarok. I would love to see a bit more of the game in action, and of course it would also be really nice if we can add in some new footage instead of reusing the same 5 minutes all the time for our videos. But we will for sure hear more about the game before it launches, so subscribe to make sure you don't miss our next God of War video, and leave a like on this one if you enjoyed it. If you want, you can watch our previous video on all the amazing combat details we managed to pull from the Game Informer footage. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.